the analogy that I've created for myself is that on my diagnosis, I was given a backpack to wear that I couldn't take off. And over time, I found that the backpack feels heavy, and I've learned to live with it on my back. It creates sores occasionally, and those hurt, and that's physical pain. The straps dig in and it becomes uncomfortable, but no matter what I do, I can't shake that backpack off. And I've learned to live with the backpack. Sometimes the backpack becomes so heavy, I find it cumbersome to the point where I don't know how I can carry on with this weight on my back, in which case I need to ask for help. I need somebody just to lift the top of the backpack to stop it digging in, stop it making sores. And I think that's probably how I cope with it.
Because it's a really key message that you can't control what's happening to you. You couldn't control your diagnosis or what the future held, but what you could control was how you processed it, handled it one day at a time, and all those coping strategies.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you'd give to someone in a similar situation, whether it's a medical diagnosis or whether it's uncertainty over anything else, such as, I don't know, redundancy at work or even COVID? I mean, that was a hugely uncertain time for so many of us. How would you suggest someone resolves that or works through it?
I don't think it's easy to give a single piece of advice because there's too many factors involved. What I tend to try to do is, and you mentioned it, you can take every day one step at a time, and you can test that step for stability and certainty, and if you're quite comfortable you can step on to the next one. But none of us really knows what the future holds. We can only look back. I have a phrase I've used all the time: stop looking in the rearview mirror. Because when I left the army, somebody said to me, don't look back, look forward. You've got your life experiences to date, but don't look back. Don't regret, don't look back, look forward. And you have to look forward, and you have to be able to plan forward, but occasionally you don't know where you're going, you don't know how to get there, and you don't know what's going to be there when you do get there, but you can only go forward. So stepping forward is the only thing you can do. And if it's one step at a time, one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month. At the moment, I live on a 3-monthly clock. I have my bloods done every 3 months, and the hematologist says, yep, you're great for another 3 months. And that's my time clock. That's the heartbeat that goes on in the background. And I'm different to lots of other people. But 1 day at a time is enough. If you get past the 1 day, how about try 2 days at a time when you're comfortable to be able to do so? We're all different though.
So what you can really do, I guess what you're saying in your key message is to take control of how you respond to the situation, which isn't easy at all, but try and develop those coping strategies. And you've taken control by living 1 day at a time, 1 week at a time, 3 months at a time throughout.
Coping strategies are important. The help that I got gave me some coping strategies. I enjoy fishing. And one of the coping strategies that I now use is when life's starting to get a bit of a challenge, and it can do. But even if it's not, take just a day out to go fishing and focus on fishing and on nothing else that's happening around you, because it's your time, it's good for your mental health, it's good for your own well-being, and it gives you a focus on something which is keeping your mind active on something else and not necessarily delving into the darker aspects of what might be happening.
So Brian, after you've had your leukemia diagnosis and the uncertainty that you faced with that and the coping strategies you put in place, you then had another diagnosis. So tell me about that diagnosis, but also about the difference in your response to the two and what was behind that.
Okay. So I have been a regular at the hospital between 3 and 6 months since my first diagnosis. I laugh and I joke. I say my own parking space at Salisbury Hospital, because I'm a regular there. So when the opportunity came to go to a Wellman clinic, I dismissed the idea. I have my bloods done, I'm regularly checked, I have my weight, my blood, all those normal stuff done. And I dismissed the idea. And Fiona said to me, that'd be a really good idea. Why didn't you go along anyway? And I said, okay. So I went along, and they did my blood pressure, and they did my cholesterol, and they did all the normal things. So at that time I was 58. And I went along with an open mind, not thinking anything of it. About 6 weeks after I'd had some bloods done, I got a phone call from the GP. Could you go and have some bloods done again? We want to check on some results. And I thought, my cholesterol's got to be up. It's got to be my cholesterol. So along I went, and I went, booked a blood test, sat there, and I said, well, they're checking my cholesterol again. And the technician who was taking my blood said, oh no, they're doing your PSA, because your PSA was elevated last time. Okay, what is it? She said, we don't have those, but obviously once we've got the figures from this test, we'll give them to your GP, and I'm sure the GP will discuss them with you. Okay, right, anything. Didn't think too much of it. And anyway, a few, whatever it was, 10 days later, I got a phone call from the GP to say, your PSA's slightly up. For somebody of your age, under 60, it should be under 4. Yours is 4.1. Okay, so we've just done your PSA again, just to check. But we'll check you again in 6 months' time. Okay, so in March, the following year, 2019, I went and had another PSA test, and it was up again. Now, bearing in mind I had no symptoms whatsoever that there was anything untoward going on, and to me it was just a number. Something was just a little bit out of limits. I didn't worry about it at all. It was just on the borderline, if anything. So I had it done in the early part of the year, and it was 4.7. So it was clearly on the way up and probably outside of limits. And the GP said, do you know what, I'm not happy with this. So we'll schedule an examination, and we'll see where that goes. In fact, come back in 3 months' time, we'll do your PSA again. And I went back in 3 months' time, and it was still 4.7, but I'd also got in parallel to that a urology appointment and a few other bits and pieces. So I went along with an open mind, and I had an internal examination, and the chap said, yeah, well, I think your prostate's a little bit enlarged, but there's nothing, doesn't seem anything obvious, but perhaps to do a biopsy, And I went back from that centre, and I said to Fee, do you know what they're going to, you know what they're going to find, don't you? I said, right from this early, I said, it'll just be my luck. They'll find there's something wrong with the prostate, or I've got prostate cancer, or something like that. So I went to, got the appointment for the biopsy. I went along to Winchester, and there was a military lieutenant colonel who did the biopsy. And when he realised that I was ex-military, we started to have a bit of banter. We were doing the biopsy, and he was doing a biopsy live with a I suppose it's an X-ray or that going on, so we could take the biopsies from the right place, an internal biopsy. And I kept on saying to him, so what are you seeing down there? You know, it was all a little bit light-hearted. And he said, well, we're going to need to wait for the test, the results of the biopsy coming through. And I said, no, come on. I said, you know, I'm ex-military, you're military, and I've already got leukemia. So if I've got another one, you might as well tell me. And he said, look, we need to wait for the tests. He said, however, it's not looking good. Right. Okay. Typical, isn't it? Not one, but two. And it really was that at that time, it was a case of going to need to wait for the test to come back. So I drove home, sore, and I said to Fee, I reckon I've got prostate cancer. I reckon that's exactly what I was going to say. We'd already decided, and at that point, I was in entirely pragmatic mode. There was no emotion involved at all. It was a case of, do you know what, they're going to find something, aren't they? And at that point, we'll deal with it. So Fee and I discussed all the various options. If, and there was an if, he said, yes, you got prostate cancer. And we'd already worked out a plan. Before we even got to confirmation of the diagnosis, we already had a plan on what we were going to do in terms of treatment options. We'd read up, I got onto the Prostate UK website, Prostate Cancer Support UK website. I downloaded the pack, done my background research, and fortunately or unfortunately, Fiona's father had prostate cancer, so knew a little bit about it. Went into the hospital, and sure enough, the diagnosis was prostate cancer. And he said, "Right, there's some options for there's some options for treatment." Fiona and I looked at each other and went, "No, there's not. You're going to take it all out. We've already discussed it. We expected it. We anticipated it. We've discussed the options. We've read the pack that you're just about to give us, and we decided to get rid of it." He said, "It's not broken out the capsule, so that's a really good point. But if we remove the prostate and associated plumbing, yes, it's life-changing, but your chances of survival are high, very, very high." And we went, "Okay, off you go then." And it really was like that. I walked out along with Fee along the corridor after that. "Oh, okay." And she said to me, "I didn't sign up for a bog off." Genuinely, and she still uses that phrase today. She said, "One cancer I can cope with." She said, "We got two. That's not fair. I didn't sign up for that." And the way that I dealt with it was and still do, is entirely pragmatic. And I applied an engineering context to it. I had to explain to my boys about it. And Big Son got quite upset about a second diagnosis. And I explained to him in engineering terms, a bit of me appears to have gone rusty, for want of a better metaphor or phrase. And I said, to prevent the rest of me going rusty, you're going to take the rusty bit away. And he went, "I'll get that, Dad." I said, "So that's all that's going to happen." And I had radical prostatectomy in the December 2019 by a robot, which is a bit unusual, and out the other side of it. And I had a really good experience post-treatment. I know a lot of people don't have a good time of it post-treatment, bladder problems and various other bits and pieces, but mine was, okay, it wasn't fun, but it was relatively textbook, and they got rid of it, and now I'm on a sort of the 5-year plan, go back every 6 months and have my PSA, and everything is good. But my attitude to that was polarized by comparison to my attitude to my first diagnosis.
And why do you think it was different, your attitude between when you're diagnosed with leukemia and your diagnosis with prostate cancer? What changed?
Can't get any worse. Does that make sense? I think I learned to manage my own expectations as far as the journey that I'd had, particularly around the uncertainty of my leukemia diagnosis. I've been able to reconcile things which at the start of my first diagnosis, I wasn't able to do. I couldn't see the future. I had real problems with uncertainty. This, I suppose, because the diagnosis was different and I understood it better. There was a lot more information out there. Could read up on it. I was fully informed, and more importantly, I was more mentally prepared. And actually, the second diagnosis wasn't as bad as the first diagnosis. So actually, I've still got to live with the first diagnosis after the second diagnosis, even if you take it all away. But I was mentally, I was in a totally different place. Totally different place. And the only way I can describe it is that I had to focus on it pragmatically, not emotionally.
So many men die every year of prostate cancer.
11,000 men every year die of prostate cancer.
And why do you think that is, or what could maybe any viewers watching this learn from your story?
In retrospect, and I think that I possibly did notice something, although I say I had no symptoms. Perhaps my my urinal flow had dropped off a little bit. I wasn't getting up in the middle of the night and things like this. And was that a possible symptom? Absolutely, it was in hindsight, but not to a point where it was affecting my day-to-day life at all. And something I only reflect on that in hindsight. But there are a lot of people with other similar related issues that just consider it as a function of getting old. You know, I put it down to nothing more than old age. But in isolation, I wouldn't have said that was enough to go to the doctor. Knowing what I know now, and knowing that the risk profile for gents over 50 is you know, quite different to those below 50, getting a baseline PSA, reaching out, even if you have to pay for one yourself, just so that you understand where you are now, even if you don't want to, is a really good thing. I think there is an analogy between women and breast cancer, but getting a baseline done so that you've got at 50, 55, so you know where you are now, so you can see any changes in the future, is really, really important. And don't be afraid to go and ask. You don't have to go to the GP. You can, for prostate cancer in particular, you can ring Prostate Cancer UK and speak to one of their specialist nurses. This isn't an advertisement for Prostate Cancer UK, but they are brilliant, absolutely brilliant at what they do. And they will give you the advice that you need. Too many men, unfortunately, die of prostate cancer each year because it's not until the symptoms are and the cancer is so ingrained that they then have to go and do something about it, but they suddenly realise that actually the prognosis is significantly worse than it would have been if they'd have asked earlier, asking for help.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key message, isn't it? Just asking for help and not being embarrassed.
Embarrassed is I think is the right word, because many men don't feel comfortable talking about the genital area, the way that their sexual functions all work, etc., etc. And you need to, because actually it's really important. It's no different than testicular cancer in younger men, because they're more prevalent in that piece. So you've got to be able to say something to somebody so that you can get the professional help when you need to, even if there's nothing wrong, or it's this or that, because at the end of the day, although there's 11,000 men die every year of prostate cancer, the earlier somebody can have a test and a diagnosis, the easier and the more likely there is of a more positive prognosis at the end of it. So you've got to be able to ask, even if you can't access the GP services, you can invariably find a centre that can do a PSA test and give you a baseline PSA test, so that at least you can be in charge of, to a certain extent, your own destiny. You understand what your baseline is. It's a simple blood test. It doesn't require any invasive procedure or anything at all. It's just a number, but it gives you an indication at a point in time what your PSA is. And of course, if you get a high PSA reading, that might be a need to go in, get an appointment with a GP. But even if your PSA level is normal, it gives you a baseline.
So Brian, why do you think there is a bit of a reluctance sometimes to get tested for prostate cancer or other cancers?
Well, certainly I think for prostate cancer, we are talking about parts of the male genitalia, of essentially the male sexual organs, because the prostate is part of the male sexual organs. And some gents just don't like talking about that to strangers, invariably, whether it's a doctor or anybody else, as talking about that. And there is a more than a tangible sense of embarrassment having to go to somebody and say, these parts of my body I don't think are working like they're supposed to. And I think that is a barrier to some people getting the help early, and the earlier you can get help with a positive prostate cancer diagnosis, the more likelihood that you have a successful prognosis, a really positive outcome from that, despite many men like myself having to have life-changing surgery to be able to do so. I mean, it's quite interesting because one of the coping mechanisms that I have found useful to myself. And I've got a long-term, non-terminal cancer diagnosis, which requires daily tablet-based chemotherapy. So it's relatively easy from a treatment perspective, but it is every day. And the analogy that I've created for myself is that on my diagnosis, I was given a backpack to wear that I couldn't take off. And over time, I found that the backpack feels heavy, and I've learned to live with it on my back. It creates sores occasionally, and those hurt, and that's physical pain. The straps dig in and it becomes uncomfortable, but no matter what I do, I can't shake that backpack off. And I've learned to live with the backpack. Sometimes the backpack becomes so heavy, I find it cumbersome to the point where I don't know how I can carry on with this weight on my back, in which case I need to ask for help. I need somebody just to lift the top of the backpack to stop it digging in, stop it making sores. And that's the analogy, and I still use that today. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I think all I did was say somebody's just added another brick to the backpack, and you've already got one. You've learned how to cope with it. You've learned how the straps work. You've learned how to make the backpack comfortable, and you've just got to make a small adjustment. And I think that's probably how I cope with it.
So was there a difference in the way you responded to your prostate cancer diagnosis as opposed to your original leukemia diagnosis?
Absolutely. I think for two reasons. First, my leukemia diagnosis is a rare form. There's not a lot of information out there, so I couldn't inform myself in simple terms, simple layman's terms, arguably, what was happening to my body. For prostate cancer, there is a lot of information out there. Prostate Cancer UK are fantastic at providing information from every part of the Prostate Cancer UK journey. No different than many other, I would say, common cancers. It sounds horrible, but unfortunately, it is 1 in 2 of us will at some time over our lives succumb to cancer. But there is a lot of information out there which I think allowed me to be fully informed and make my own decisions based on that information. And with Fiona helping guide those decisions, because certainly when you have, for instance, a radical prostatectomy, they take away quite often, and for me it was the case, part of your sexual function as well as your urinary function as well. And you learn to have to live with those life-changing effects afterwards, which is why it's called life-changing surgery, because they remove essentially a functioning organ, and they take out parts of your wiring, parts of your nervous system as well. And you have to, so you end up with another new normal. Coping wise, again, it was just somebody added another, for me personally, somebody added something else extra for me to carry, but I'd learned to cope with the straps digging in, the weight of the backpack, the fact it's uncomfortable, and it became my new normal. It's
really inspirational actually to hear you talking about your backpack analogy, because what it's bringing to mind is for me, is also some of our disabled community at Aerobility, some of whom, were able-bodied and have transitioned to using a wheelchair. And also people in other walks of life who have had to go through a massive change that they haven't expected or asked for, and they've just been presented with this huge change. And it's been a strategy that you've employed, which hopefully is a key message to some of our viewers, of a way of dealing with change and taking back control of a situation that you can't control, but you're taking back an element of control by how you're responding to it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The more control that you can have over your own thoughts and feelings, the better. And this gives me the control. And more importantly, it allows me to understand when it's getting heavy, when it's getting sore, and it triggers if I need to ask for help, then essentially I'm using this analogy of a backpack. And I do think of it as a backpack. I generally think of me carrying this black backpack on my back all the time. It has to be black because It just is. But think of me carrying this backpack on my back all the time and not being able to take it off. Some people on their life journey will be able to take that backpack off at some point when their treatment's got to a stage where they don't need any treatment. When they've got to a stage that they're entirely comfortable, regardless of what that situation is, they may say, do you know what, now it's time to, I can take my backpack off and free the weight of that. For me, constant chemotherapy, etc., I can't do that, but I'm now comfortable. I'm getting used to my backpack. I've tried really, really hard that my illnesses haven't defined me, and I'm not defined by those illnesses, and that takes effort. And nobody sees my backpack either, and that's really important as well, because it's my own weight, my own backpack that I'm carrying, not anybody else's backpack. In my head, of course, but that's how I personally deal with my particular journey. I've not heard anybody else use the analogy before, but I think it's quite powerful, and I think if mentally you can conjure that picture up in your own mind, I think it works really well.
So we've talked about physical health, and your backpack analogy brings us really into now talking about the side of mental health and how the two are really inextricably linked. So talk to me then about why mental health is important to you.
I again use an analogy. I think the fog analogy comes to the fore again. That's how I think about it. I really like to be clear thinking. As an engineer, I'm quite process driven, and I like logic. I really enjoy logical things. So being able to focus on something is something that just the way that my brain works. So I'm trying to achieve something, I've got a clear path to achieving that. I see mental health and issues affecting my own mental health as somebody can start to be a mist on that journey, and then potentially a fog that actually clouds your ability to see it, the long-term future, or focus on your tasks. And if we can understand that there are mechanisms to deal with that mist, that fog, then we can have the ability to clear our own path through it, not always successfully, but clear our own path through it, and allow us to focus on the really important things and try to address the things that are affecting us, and putting that veil into our consciousness. Because I think it does come down to consciousness. If you're focused on a particular, it doesn't matter whether you're driving a car or eating your dinner, and there's something else gnawing away and you're not 100% focused on that, it is a mental health. It's your brain that's processing information for whatever reason that ideally it shouldn't be processing, or more importantly, you found a mechanism for pushing it away so that it becomes it doesn't impact on your day-to-day life.
What advice would you give to anybody then with regards to mental health, if they're not putting their mental health first, or with regards to how important it is for their overall well-being?
Mental health is really, really important. Your body's physical, spiritual, and mental needs have to be balanced and in equilibrium. If you're focused on something negative, as an example, and your focus is on the negative aspect, then it prevents you doing the positive outcomes, which is to live your life to the full. So if you've got something gnawing away at you all the time, if you're not careful, you can as happened to me, you can get into that anxiety spiral where more and more of your time is focused on the negative aspects and working out how you get out of that, and you stop actually being as effective on your normal day-to-day stuff as possible. And it's just anything as simple as going to the loo and thinking, looking in the mirror and thinking, something's not quite right here, and all of a sudden your normal task has gone out the window. Whatever you're doing, mowing the grass, making dinner, whatever's gone out the window, and all of a sudden you're focused on something else, and you don't know how to press the stop button. There's no stop button there. I was taught by the psychologist that I saw when I was first diagnosed that I needed a mental stop button. So when that anxiety spiral starts to build and the momentum starts to build, that I need to be able to mentally press the stop button. And that for me was really, and I picture it in my head as a big red button with the word stop written on it that says stop, because essentially you're overthinking about something that's negative and is starting to encroach onto your day-to-day to the point where it can consume you, and you stop being effective essentially, and it's all-encompassing, all-consuming, and that's all you're focused on. You need to hit the stop button well before it gets to that stage, and you need to go and find somebody to tell you where the stop button is, help you push it, and what you do when you've pushed it.